The first detective vanished in 1997. He left the precinct at 9:42 p.m., telling colleagues he was heading home. His car was found still idling 2 blocks away, driver's door wide open, headlights cutting into an empty alley. His badge was on the seat. His gun was gone. By the third disappearance, whispers had turned to dread. This wasn't random. Each detective had been assigned to the same cold case. A string of murders in a rural town where the victim's eyes were always missing. Files from the 1960s hinted at something more than human, but no one wanted to believe it. The 7th detective's wife swore he'd been acting strangely for weeks. He would wake in the middle of the night, standing at the window, muttering numbers under his breath. The day before he vanished, he mailed her a single envelope. Inside was a Polaroid of a basement wall, scratched with 9 vertical lines, the last one only half carved. By the 9th disappearance, the FBI stepped in, but even they refused to say the case's name in public. The official statement called it a series of unrelated personal tragedies. Off the record, agents warned rookie cops never to ask questions about it. Some say the case is cursed. Others believe there's a man, or something like one, still hunting those who dig too deep. The files are locked away, the evidence sealed, and the only people who could explain it have all vanished. The question remains, why did they disappear, and what were they about to find? There's a file in the evidence room of a forgotten precinct in Texas that hasn't been touched in over 20 years. Not because it's closed, but because every time someone tries to work it, they disappear. 9 detectives in total, all trained, experienced, some of them decorated heroes, gone without a trace. The case they were working on was unlike anything else in the Bureau's archives. It began with a murder so grotesque it barely made the papers. Editors refused to print the photographs. The victim's body was staged in a way that suggested ritual, precision, almost like a warning. And then it happened again and again. Each crime scene whispered the same question: who was behind this, and why did the investigators vanish before finding out? Rumors spread quickly through law enforcement circles. Some say the killer had infiltrated the police. Others believe the crime scenes were booby-trapped, not with explosives, but with something worse: psychological traps that drove men insane before they could close in. There were even whispers of something supernatural, but those stories never made it into official reports. Today, we're going to piece together the fragments left behind: the last phone calls, the final surveillance tapes, the strange items found in their desks. We'll walk through each disappearance and the possible connections between them, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get closer to the truth that claimed 9 lives. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to this channel and click the like button so more people can hear about cases like this. And in the comments, tell me from which country and city you're watching this. Who knows? Your location might have its own unsolved story worth telling. Now, let's open the file that no one dares to touch. Chapter 1. The first Detective Samuel Brooks had been on the force for 17 years. He wasn't the kind of man who spooked easily. Former Marine, decorated in the Gulf War, with a reputation for solving cases others had written off as impossible. But the night of January 14th, 1997, something made him leave the precinct in a hurry. At 9:42 p.m., Brooks signed out a single key from the evidence locker, the key to a small rusted metal box tagged Case 41-6B. The box had been sealed for decades. The case file that went with it contained photographs so disturbing they were kept in a separate envelope, labeled "Do not release without command authorization." The security camera by the parking lot caught him stepping out into the cold air, pulling his coat tight, his breath fogging. His sedan's headlights flicked on. He got in. 2 minutes later, the same camera caught something strange. His car slowing to a stop at the far end of the lot, engine still running, driver's side door swinging open. Brooks was gone. The responding officers found his badge neatly placed on the driver's seat. His sidearm was missing, but his wallet and cell phone were untouched. The metal evidence box was in the passenger seat, unopened. That's when they noticed the alley. It ran behind the precinct, between two abandoned warehouses, choked with shadows. Footprints in the snow led from Brooks's car into that darkness, and then stopped, not turned around, not scattered, just stopped, as if the man had vanished mid-step. The prints weren't the only thing they found. Pushed halfway into the snow, just inches from where the trail ended, was an old Polaroid photograph. The image was blurry, but you could make out what looked like a concrete wall, streaked with something dark. In the center, scratched deep into the surface, were 4 vertical lines. Forensics confirmed the photo was at least 20 years old. No one could explain how it ended up in that alley, or why the chemical composition of the print showed traces of salt water, despite the nearest ocean being hundreds of miles away. The precinct launched a full search, combing through warehouses, rooftops, even draining the storm drains. They found nothing. No fibers, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Brooks's disappearance was ruled unexplained, though among the officers a different word was whispered: cursed. In the weeks that followed, more oddities surfaced. Brooks's locker was cleared out by someone before his family arrived. His home computer had its hard drive wiped, and the key to the evidence box gone. The box itself vanished from the evidence room a week later. Security footage from that night had been mysteriously corrupted. It would take another 6 months before the second detective assigned to the same case file vanished under equally impossible circumstances. By then, the story of Samuel Brooks was already a warning, a ghost tale told in hushed voices during late-night shifts. And the question was no longer what happened to him, but what had he found, and why had it been enough to erase him from the world entirely? Chapter 2: The Second Disappearance. Detective Lila Moreno read the Brooks file with a cigarette burning down to the filter between her fingers. She'd transferred from San Antonio after cracking a triple homicide that had paralyzed a neighborhood with fear. People called her unshakable. Her captain called her unlucky. On July 9, 1997, she signed her name to case 416B and told the records clerk, half joking, "If I don't clock out tonight, burn this city to the ground." The clerk didn't laugh. Moreno began where Brooks ended, the alley. Midday heat baked the brick to a dull shimmer. She crouched where the footprints had stopped and traced the air with her palm, as if feeling for a door no one could see. Then she walked the perimeter, measuring angles, pacing steps. On her third pass, she knelt beside a storm grate and pried it up. Inside, the concrete throat was lined with salt deposits, the same white crust you find near a harbor. The nearest harbor was 300 miles away. Back at her desk, she spread the original photos from the 1960s murders across a map. All the bodies had been found indoors: basements, cold rooms, windowless sheds, each crime scene stripped of mirrors and reflective glass. In one picture, a clock hung crooked on a wall, stuck at 3:17. In another, a painting of the sea had been cut from its frame with a razor. Moreno drew a circle that caught all of them. At the circle's center, a derelict meatpacking plant on Harrow Road. That night, she called the watch commander, requested a uniform to meet her at the plant, then changed her mind mid-sentence and said she'd do a solo recon first. 20 minutes in and out, she promised. She kept the line open as she drove, radio muttering on the passenger seat, dispatcher breathing like a second presence in the car. Thunderheads stacked over the highway. Lightning showed the plant as a silhouette of saw teeth. Inside, her flashlight found the usual detritus: rusted hooks, crates, a collapsed office where pigeons had built nests of shredded invoices. The beam skimmed a concrete wall and caught a pattern carved low at knee height: 4 vertical lines. Then a fifth, half-slashed like a thought interrupted. "I've got marks," she said into the radio. "Same count as the Polaroid. Stand by for..." The radio coughed static. A whistle, almost musical, threaded through the interference. Moreno followed the whistle into a corridor where protective plastic sheets still hung from metal rails. They stirred in a wind that didn't exist. Beyond them, a cold room yawned open, its thermometer long dead, its floor faintly slick. On the far wall, someone had bolted a pane of glass, not a window, just glass, as if the room needed a mirror after all. Her light hit it. For a split second, she saw herself. Then the reflection blinked. She froze. The reflection was hers, but not. The jaw was set at a crueler angle. The eyes were a fraction too wide. The cigarette burn on her knuckle was on the wrong hand. She took one slow step closer and raised the beam. The radio hissed, and through it, a voice she knew too well. Brooks's voice, grainy, distant, saying her name like a sigh. Lila! The glass fogged with breath from no one in the room. Training dragged her backward. She moved 3 paces, pivoted, sighted the entry. That was when she noticed the floor, wet crescents like the bottoms of bare feet, moving toward the door and stopping just at the threshold, as if something had obeyed a rule she didn't know. In the hallway behind her, the plastic sheets lifted and settled. A drip-tap rhythm started somewhere above, a leak that matched a heartbeat. "Dispatch, I need a second unit at Harrow Road," she said. "I'm exiting." She backed down the corridor, left hand on the wall, right hand on the gun. As she reached the loading bay, rain detonated on the metal roof. The bay door was half open, chain slack. Outside, the lot was empty, except for her car, wipers twitching to life on their own. The driver's door swung wide, slow, welcoming. On the front seat lay a Polaroid of the plant's cold room. Across the bottom margin, in a neat, childish hand, "Stay inside." The dash cam recorded the next 41 seconds. Moreno stepped into frame, holstered her weapon, bent and picked up the photo. Lightning tore the sky, thunder staggered the camera mic. She looked back toward the plant, lips shaping a curse, and then she was gone. Not pulled, not attacked. One frame she was there, rain seaming the air around her. The next frame, empty concrete under a bruised sky. The radio stayed open for another minute. In the hiss, if you turn the volume high enough, there's that whistle again, and something else beneath it, like waves striking a seawall in a town that has never known the sea. Chapter 3. The Third to Vanish. By the time Detective Alan Mercer took the assignment, the Brooks and Moreno disappearances had already become whispered law within the department. Mercer wasn't a believer in curses. He believed in people, in lies, and in the ugly truths that drove them. But when his captain slid the Case 41-6B folder across the desk, Mercer paused at the Polaroid of the concrete wall with the 4 carved lines. He had seen the same mark once before, in a case that had ended with a suicide note and an empty room. Mercer's approach was clinical. He requested every scrap of paper from the original 1960s murders, right down to coroner's sketches. He built a wall in his office with crime scene photos, maps and timelines. There was a pattern, not just in the locations, but in the calendar dates. Each victim had been killed exactly 42 days apart, the gap never broken. He counted forward from the last known date. The next mark on the timeline was less than a week away. On the evening of that marked day, Mercer was in his unmarked sedan outside a boarded-up church in the Bronx. The building had been condemned for years, yet its stained glass was immaculate, the colors glimmering in the moonlight as though lit from within. Neighbors swore they'd seen figures moving behind the glass, tall, still silhouettes that vanished when approached. Mercer waited until 3 a.m., then broke the lock and went inside. The pews were dust-coated except for one row near the altar. The wood there gleamed like it had been wiped clean hours ago. On the seat lay an envelope with his name typed on it. Inside was a Polaroid, this one showing the inside of his own apartment, his bed, the nightstand, the half-drunk glass of water he'd left that morning. On the back, a message in the same neat, childish hand. "Turn around." His instincts flared. Mercer didn't turn. He sidestepped, pivoting to catch the reflection in the polished brass of a candle holder. Something stood in the aisle behind him, too tall for a man, draped in something that clung like wet cloth. its head tilted, slow as a clock's hand. In the candle holder's reflection, the eyes were twin voids, swallowing the brass's shine. Mercer drew his weapon and moved toward the door. The air in the church had shifted, heavier, tasting faintly of salt. His boots made no sound on the wood. The stained glass above the altar flickered with an impossible scene. Waves breaking against a concrete seawall, water climbing higher with each crash. He blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the familiar saints. As he reached the vestibule, the front door slammed shut without a touch. Behind him, pews scraped across the floor in a staggered rhythm, like something weaving its way forward. He radioed for backup, voice tight. "Suspect in the building. Possible armed intruder." No response, only the same whistle that had stalked Moreno, thin and reedy through the static. He bolted for the side exit, throwing his shoulder into the wood until it splintered. Cold rain hit his face. The lot outside was empty, except for a lone street lamp buzzing overhead. At its base sat another Polaroid, face down in the puddles. He picked it up without thinking. It was a photo of him, taken seconds ago, in the exact position he stood, rain blurring the edges. The next few minutes existed only on the dash cam of his sedan. Mercer is seen running to the car, slamming the door, fumbling with the ignition. The headlights blaze to life. Then, mid-frame, Mercer's body jerks violently, not toward the door, but upward, as if something had hooked him from above. His seatbelt snaps back against the chair. The driver's seat is empty before the engine cuts. Responding units found the church doors open. The pews returned to perfect alignment and no sign of Mercer. Only his service pistol lay on the altar, next to the candle holder, now dull, tarnished, and streaked with grains of salt. Chapter 4. The investigator who tried to quit. Detective Sam Rourke was the kind of man who always kept one suitcase packed, not for travel, but for escape. When the Brooks, Moreno, and Mercer files landed on his desk, he didn't laugh like the rookies did. He didn't mutter about urban legends. He simply closed the folder, locked it in his desk, and drove home without a word. That night, he called his captain and requested reassignment. The captain refused. "Nobody quits this case, Sam. Not anymore." Rourke had seen too many of his own vanish in ways no man could explain, but he wasn't about to let his name be carved into that pattern. He worked the case from his apartment, blinds drawn, phone off the hook. He didn't step foot near the crime scenes. Instead, he traced bank records, shipment manifests, and death certificates, searching for something human to blame. But the deeper he dug, the more the dates lined up. The 42-day rhythm was still alive, and the next interval, 3 days away. That evening, the knocking started. Not the frantic pounding of someone in danger, but a slow, deliberate 3 beats. Pause, 3 beats, pause. It came from inside the wall by his kitchen. Rourke froze, hand hovering over his service pistol. The knocking stopped. A faint smell of salt crept into the air, so subtle he almost thought he'd imagined it. The following morning, he found a Polaroid slid under his door. It showed his own apartment building from the street, except the windows on his floor were blacked out, as if painted over. On the back, the childish handwriting again, "You're already inside." Rourke decided to burn the photo. As the edges curled, the smoke carried that same salt tang, sharper now, stinging his eyes. He doused the ashes and started packing his prepped suitcase. He would drive until the road ended. No more investigating, no more city. He was halfway down the stairwell when he heard footsteps above him, light, unhurried, keeping pace with his descent. He stopped. The steps stopped. He went down one more flight. They started again, perfectly timed. He drew his weapon and spun around, aiming up the stairwell. Empty. When he reached the lobby, the building's front doors were propped open, rain sweeping in from the street. His car was parked across the road, wipers dragging back and forth against the dry windshield. In the driver's seat was another Polaroid, this one of the stairwell he had just descended, except in the photo, there was a shadow standing on the third-floor landing. He got in the car, tossed the photo onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The radio clicked on by itself. At first it was static, then the whistle. Low, constant, like a shanty sung through broken teeth. Beneath it, a voice barely above a whisper, 3 days, Sam. You're early. The traffic lights on the corner all turned green at once, though there were no other cars in sight. Rourke drove straight through, tires hissing on wet asphalt. The dash cam caught the last 30 seconds. The road ahead lit by headlights, then a flicker of water, as if a wave rose from nowhere. The camera shook violently, the lens blurring with droplets from inside the car. When patrol units found the vehicle an hour later, the driver's seat was empty, but the seatbelt was still buckled. In the back seat lay his packed suitcase, untouched, and a damp Polaroid of the ocean crashing against a seawall under a black sky. A place no one in the precinct could name. Chapter 5. The Rookie Who Broke the Rules. Officer Daniel Vega had been in homicide for just 6 months when the whispers about Case 416B reached his ears. The veterans told him to stay away, to keep his curiosity chained. Vega, however, believed every superstition had a human explanation. Patterns mean plans, he told himself, and plans mean people. When the Brooks, Moreno, Mercer and Rourke disappearances came up in the morning briefing, he volunteered before anyone else could speak. The captain's look was one of quiet resignation. "Rookie," he said, "you'll be number 10. Vega grinned. "Then I'll be the one who breaks it." His strategy was simple: disrupt the 42-day cycle by showing up before the pattern's next strike. He convinced 2 colleagues to monitor all 3 locations tied to the original murders. He'd watch the old seawall. They'd cover the church and the warehouse. The seawall was a jagged scar on the city's waterfront, constantly lashed by waves. Vega arrived just after sunset, the tide already rising. The air was heavy with brine and rot. He carried a thermos of coffee, a camera, and a revolver. "Because this case isn't about handcuffs," his mentor had told him. Hours passed without incident until the street lamps lining the dock began to fail one by one, each going dark in a slow ripple toward him. Vega tightened his grip on the revolver. Out on the black water, something moved. Not a boat, not a swimmer, but a slow, deliberate shape gliding just below the surface. The radio on his shoulder crackled. It was one of his partners posted at the church. "Danny, there's someone here." The voice was strained, shaky. It's you." Before Vega could reply, the transmission collapsed into static. The water below the seawall churned violently, as if something massive had turned over. Spray hit Vega's face, sharp with the sting of salt. He aimed down into the froth and froze. A pale hand gripped the wall from below, fingers too long, nails chipped to raw bone. Another hand followed, then the top of a head, slick and black as oil, rising inch by inch. Vega stepped back, heart slamming against his ribs. His boot hit something, a Polaroid lying in a shallow puddle. He snatched it without thinking. It showed him standing exactly where he was now, gun raised, a figure looming behind him in the mist. The next moment was captured only on a security camera from a cargo crane across the docks. Vega spinning around, shouting something that the wind stole, then being yanked backward so fast his legs left the ground. His flashlight and revolver clattered to the pavement, rolling toward the seawall's edge. The search team arrived minutes later. The dock was empty, save for Vega's thermos, still warm, and another Polaroid, this one of the seawall under a black sky, the waves frozen mid-crash, as though the ocean itself had been paused in the act of swallowing something whole. With Vega gone, the department was forced to admit the pattern was no longer just a whisper. The roster of 9 had become 10. And if the numbers meant anything, the 11th was already marked. Chapter 6. The Journalist Who Wanted the Truth. Mara Keene had a reputation for chasing stories others refused to touch. Her desk at the New York Sentinel was cluttered with half-finished investigations, Polaroids of cold cases, and a Rolodex filled with names that never made it to print. When she heard about the missing 9, She didn't see a curse. She saw a career-defining exposé. The police refused interviews. Families hung up the phone. But one retired officer agreed to meet her in a diner at the edge of town. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of the last notes taken by the 9th detective, along with a single Polaroid of a seawall under a black sky. Written across the bottom in smeared ink, "You're next." Mara knew intimidation tactics when she saw them. Still, there was something about the photo, the way the waves seemed frozen mid-crash, as though time itself had stopped, that left her unsettled. She decided to dig deeper, beginning with the families of the missing officers. 3 houses in, she noticed a pattern. Each home had an unopened package sitting in the mailbox, postmarked the day before the officer vanished. Against her better judgment, she opened the 3rd package. Inside was a cassette tape labeled with a date and a single word, "Waiting." When she played it in her car, the audio began with low static, then a rhythmic knocking. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Beneath it, a voice, barely above a whisper, "Mara Keene, you're early." Her phone rang. The caller ID was blank. She answered only to hear the sound of waves and seagulls. Then the line went dead. The next day, she followed a lead to the docks where Vega had disappeared. The seawall loomed in the fog, slick with rain. As she approached, a figure stood at the edge, back to her, coat flapping in the wind. She called out, but the figure didn't move. When she reached the spot, there was no one there, only another Polaroid lying face down on the wet concrete. It was a photo of herself, taken from behind, at this exact moment. That night, her editor received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was Mara's press badge, waterlogged and smelling of salt. Alongside it, a Polaroid of an empty seawall. Mara Keene's article never made it to print. Her desk at the Sentinel remains untouched, her computer still logged in, cursor blinking over the headline, "9 men gone, and I know why." Chapter 7. The Survivor Who Came Back Wrong. For 12 years, no one returned from Case 41-6B. Then, on a rainy Thursday in late October, they found Detective Frank Heller walking barefoot along Highway 287. His clothes were soaked in salt water, even though the nearest coast was hundreds of miles away. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, they weren't the same color as before. Heller had vanished 5 years earlier while tracking the 3rd crime scene. The department had declared him dead. Now, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights of the ER, he looked at his former colleagues like they were strangers. When asked where he'd been, he gave only one answer: beneath the tide, where the lights hum. The FBI took him to a secure psychiatric unit, but the interviews were a disaster. The audio recordings captured more than just his voice. Faint, wet sounds in the background, like dripping water echoing through a tunnel. Agents reported feeling dizzy during questioning, as if the room itself was leaning. Heller's account was fragmented. He spoke of corridors that breathe, of seeing the missing detectives walking in single file, their heads bowed, eyes shut tight. He described walls slick with something that pulsed like a heartbeat, and whispers in the dark calling him by his childhood nickname, one he hadn't heard since his mother died. Doctors tried to sedate him, but every time he closed his eyes, his body convulsed violently, as if fighting something inside. After one particularly severe episode, he was found holding a Polaroid no one had given him. It showed the psychiatric ward from above, as if the ceiling had been transparent. And in the picture, Heller wasn't alone in the bed. 2 days later, security footage caught him standing in the hallway at 3:17 a.m., staring into the camera. His mouth moved, forming words no one could hear. Then, without triggering any alarms, he simply wasn't there anymore. The hallway lights flickered once and steadied. In his vacated room, staff found damp footprints leading to the window, though it was locked from the inside. On the sill sat a cassette tape labeled 10. When played, it revealed the same 3 knocks heard on Mara Keene's tape, followed by a voice, deep, slow, and utterly inhuman, saying, "One returned, one owed." After Heller's second disappearance, the Bureau locked down all evidence related to him. But some agents kept copies of the Polaroid and the tape, passing them around as a grim sort of talisman. No one knew if keeping them close was a warning or an invitation. The families of the other missing detectives took Heller's brief reappearance as a sign that their loved ones might still be alive, but the investigators on the case weren't so sure. In the single photo taken of Heller after his return, his shadow doesn't match his body. It's taller, and it leans toward the camera. Whatever had been wearing Frank Heller's skin, it wasn't done. And the way the pattern had shifted meant the next disappearance wasn't 42 days away. It could happen any night. Chapter 8. The Collector's House. It was Agent Morales who first noticed the connection. Among the scattered witness statements, one address kept surfacing, never mentioned directly, always tucked in the background as if it were trying not to be seen. The address belonged to an abandoned house on the outskirts of Corpus Christi, known among locals only as the Collector's House. The property records were blank for the last 30 years. Neighbors said no one lived there, yet the blinds were always drawn, and the mailbox was emptied every Friday at midnight. More than one child dared each other to step onto the porch, but none made it past the first step before bolting away, claiming they heard someone whisper their name from inside. Morales, unwilling to wait for backup, entered alone. The air inside was thick with the smell of brine, like a dock at low tide. The walls were covered in shelves, and on those shelves were hundreds of glass jars, each containing a single item: a key, a wristwatch, a badge, a wedding ring. Every jar had a date written in red ink, and a name scratched into the glass from the inside. In the center of the living room sat a table. On it, neatly arranged in a circle, were 9 Polaroids, one for each missing detective. In every photo, the detective was looking directly at the camera, eyes wide, as if caught mid-sentence. Behind them loomed a figure made of shadow, featureless except for a faint outline of shoulders and a head. Morales picked up the photo of Frank Heller. The moment his skin touched it, the lights in the house went out. In the dark, he heard jars rattling on their shelves, lids twisting open one by one. A faint sloshing sound filled the room. When his flashlight flickered back on, the jars were empty. The names on the glass had vanished, and on the floor at his feet, a trail of wet footprints led toward the back of the house. Following them, he reached a basement door. The lock had been smashed from the inside. He descended the narrow steps into a room that reeked of seawater and rot. In the corner stood a wardrobe, its doors slightly ajar. Inside hung coats, 9 of them, each still damp, each tagged with the detective's name. Before he could react, something moved in the darkness behind the wardrobe. It whispered his name, the way a diver might exhale bubbles underwater. Morales dropped his flashlight. In the brief beam as it spun on the floor, he saw a face, not a stranger's, his own, staring back at him. When backup arrived, the house was empty. Every jar was sealed again, but this time each one contained a Polaroid. All 9 detectives and Agent Morales. The Collector's House is now under federal seal, but locals say they still see lights flicker inside on Friday nights. And if you press your ear to the porch railing, you can hear the faint, muffled sound of glass tapping from somewhere deep underground. Chapter 9. The Last Transmission. The FBI's audio archive for Case 416B was sealed months earlier, labeled Classified, Tier 5. But an anonymous package arrived at the office of investigative podcaster Evelyn Cross. A single reel-to-reel tape with the words, "Play Me Before Midnight," scratched into its casing. When Evelyn threaded the tape into her recorder, the static nearly blew her speakers. Beneath it was a faint, repetitive sound. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. She recognized it instantly from leaked clips of Mara Keene's and Frank Heller's tapes. But then, another voice joined in. It was male, breathless and ragged. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it out. They're in the water, they're in the walls, they're behind the glass, don't look." His words cut off into a gasp, then a muffled splash. There was a long stretch of silence, broken only by what sounded like footsteps sloshing through shallow water. Then a low, drawn-out hum filled the speakers, vibrating deep in Evelyn's chest. It was almost a word, waiting. As the hum faded, another sound emerged, faint radio chatter, voices calling out badge numbers in sequence. The list matched the IDs of the 9 missing detectives. When it reached the 10th number, it was Evelyn's own driver's license ID. She froze. The recording wasn't just from the past. It knew her, and it knew she was listening. Near the end, the tape warped, stretching the voices into unnatural tones. A wet, rasping breath came through the speakers. "One left to find. Then we can come through." The final seconds were pure static, until a single knock echoed through her apartment, perfectly matching the rhythm from the tape. Evelyn hit stop, but the knocking continued, slow and deliberate, from just beyond her front door. When she finally opened it, the hallway was empty, except for a Polaroid taped to the door. It showed her sitting at her desk, wearing the exact clothes she had on at that moment. The tape has never been played again. But every Friday just before midnight, Evelyn swears she hears the reel-to-reel click on by itself, and the knocking start all over again. Chapter 10, Where the Tide Ends. The Bureau believed the disappearances were random, until the 10th day after Evelyn Cross received the tape. That morning, the tide along the Texas coastline receded farther than any recorded in living memory, exposing a stretch of seabed that should have been miles offshore. Fishermen reported seeing objects half buried in the wet sand: watches, badges, photographs sealed in jars. Every item was ice-cold to the touch, and each carried a faint, rhythmic vibration. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. When the Bureau arrived, the sun was already setting. As the sky dimmed, the objects began to sink, as though the seabed itself were breathing. Agent Morales' coat was among them, perfectly dry despite lying in the surf. Inside its pocket was the Polaroid Evelyn had found taped to her door. But now she wasn't alone in the frame. A figure stood behind her, tall and formless, with water pouring endlessly from where its face should have been. The droplets hit the ground in perfect time with the knocking. Against orders, Evelyn stepped toward the water. The figure in the Polaroid raised a hand, and the tide rushed back in like a wall, swallowing everything. Agents screamed as the cold hit them. The light from their flashlights fractured in the spray, bending into shapes that looked almost human. When the waves retreated, the beach was empty. No agents, no evidence, no Evelyn Cross. Only the jars remained, floating in the shallows, each now containing a single thing: a pressed, wet Polaroid of the person who had been holding it moments before. The Bureau tried to bury the incident, but locals tell another story. They say that on certain nights, when the tide pulls back too far, you can see shadows walking on the exposed seabed, not out to sea, but toward the shore. The collector's house has been abandoned since, though its blinds still twitch on Friday nights. And if you're close enough, you might hear it: the slow tap of glass, the sound of dripping water, and then 3 knocks. Some believe the case is over, others know better. Case 416B was never about the victims. It was about the door they were keeping shut. And now, with 10 taken, there's no one left on the inside to hold it closed. Whatever's coming through, the tide will bring it. And when it does, it won't stop at 10. The official report calls it inconclusive. The beach was empty, the jars were empty, the names were empty. Yet on certain nights, the shoreline still exhales too far, revealing a ribcage of seabed where badges and watches once lay ticking with that patient rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause, 3. Locals swear the fog keeps count. They say the wind carries salt from nowhere, and that if you speak any of the 9 names aloud, the surf answers with a 10th. Evelyn's reel-to-reel remains on her desk, dust settling on the spools like ash on a cold altar. At 11:59 p.m., neighbors hear it click, then breathe. The tape is silent to anyone brave enough to press play, but walls remember what machines forget. Sometimes the glass in the hallway mirror clouds from the inside, and for a heartbeat you see appear a black horizon, a figure lifting a hand as if to knock. The door between here and whatever waits beneath the tide wasn't opened with keys or warrants. It was opened with attention. So leave the jars where they bob. Leave the photos face down. If you must listen, do not count. Because Case 416B was never just about missing detectives. It was about a threshold, and thresholds once crossed don't lead back, they lead through.